On their wedding night, he discovered a truth that broke every prejudice. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain slammed against the tall glass windows of Carter & Co. headquarters, the kind of cold spring rain that makes the whole city look like silver smoke. Inside the boardroom, Alexander Carter, 32 billionaire CEO, sat with his tie loosened and a storm in his eyes. He had just received the final warning from his grandfather's lawyer. If he was not married by the end of the quarter, he would lose his inheritance and control of the company. Across from him sat Lila Tran, a young fashion designer whose career was collapsing after a false plagiarism accusation. Her once bright portfolio lay closed on the table, soaked from the rain she had run through to get here. She needed a miracle. He needed a wife. Alexander spoke first, his tone calm but cutting. "Marry me. Think of it as a contract." Lila blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "Excuse me?" He slid a thin folder toward her, pages of legal print already signed. 1 year. Appear at public events. Pretend to be my wife. And in return, I will pay off your debts and rebuild your studio. No strings attached. Lila stared at him. The sound of rain filled the silence. "You are serious?" "Completely," he said, leaning back. "It is a business arrangement, nothing more. I do not believe in love, Miss Tran. I believe in results." Her jaw tightened, pride flickering through her fear. "And if I say no?" He shrugged. "Then both of us lose something tonight." Quote, the clock on the wall ticked loud enough to feel like thunder. For a moment, she saw the reflection of herself in the glass-wet hair, trembling hands, and eyes that still refused to give up. She had spent her life sewing for others, fixing hems and dreams that were never her own. Maybe this was the price of survival. Finally, she said softly, "Fine, but I have my own terms." He raised an eyebrow. "Go on." 1, she said, lifting her chin. "We keep it professional. 2, you do not touch me. And 3, when this ends, you let me go without a fight." Alexander's lips curved in a faint, unreadable smile. "Agreed." Outside, lightning flashed over Manhattan, lighting up their faces through the window. 2 strangers bound by necessity, not affection. 2 signatures that would change both their lives forever. And as the rain kept falling, neither of them could imagine that one night, under the same roof, a single drop of truth would shatter every wall they had built around their hearts. The courthouse was small, quiet, and smelled faintly of old paper and rain. 1 week after that strange meeting, Alexander Carter stood beside Lila Tran in front of a weary judge who had seen every kind of marriage except one that looked quite like this. Their signatures dried before their hearts even caught up. No guests, no music, just 2 pens, 2 names, and an agreement sealed in silence. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander turned to her with a polite, distant smile. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Carter." Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. A black car waited at the curb, and the driver held an umbrella. Lila clutched the small bouquet she had brought herself. It was not fresh. She had picked the flowers that morning from a park near her apartment, white daisies slightly bruised by the wind. As the car pulled away, she looked back through the window and whispered, "Goodbye, old life." The ride to his estate was silent. The world beyond the glass shifted from crowded streets to long, winding roads lined with trees and iron fences. When the car finally stopped, the mansion rose like a fortress against the gray sky. Stone columns, iron gates, too large for warmth, too beautiful to be home. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, chandeliers, tall windows that reflected their shapes like strangers in a mirror. A housekeeper greeted them with a bow. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Carter." Lila forced a polite smile. Alexander gestured to the grand staircase. "Your room is upstairs, 3rd door on the left. Dinner is at 7. You may ask the staff for anything you need." "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the echo of the hall. She walked up the steps, her heels clicking softly. Her room was larger than her entire apartment. A vase of white lilies sat on the dresser, their scent sharp and cold. She opened the closet and found rows of new clothes, all her size. The thought unsettled her. He had planned everything before she even said yes. At 7, she went downstairs. The dining table stretched like a runway between them. Alexander sat at the far end, his phone beside the silverware. The food was exquisite steak, roasted vegetables, wine, but it tasted of nothing. He looked up once. "Are you settling in?" "Yes," she said. "It is beautiful. It is efficient," he corrected. "Beauty fades. Function lasts." She set down her fork. Maybe both can exist at the same time. His eyes met hers, curious but unreadable. "You really believe that?" "I have to," she said. "If I stop believing, I stop creating." For the first time, he did not have an answer. When dinner ended, she stood and thanked him before leaving the room. He watched her walk away, the sound of her footsteps fading through the hall. Something about her calmness unsettled him. She was not desperate, not clinging, not what he expected from someone who needed money. Later that night, Alexander walked into his study. Rain had started again, tapping against the windows. He poured a drink but did not touch it. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a small framed photo of his late father, the man who had built the empire he now protected. His father's words echoed in his head. "Marry someone useful, not emotional. Love is distraction." Upstairs, Lila sat on the edge of the bed. She took out her old sewing kit and began mending the torn hem of her dress. The rhythmic sound of the needle steadied her heartbeat. Her mind replayed his tone, cold but not cruel, guarded like someone who had been burned before. She whispered to herself, "You chose this, Lila. 1 year, then freedom." Downstairs, Alexander closed the drawer and stared out at the storm. He told himself it was just a contract, a line in his ledger, a box checked. Yet somewhere deep inside, a question rose he could not quite silence. Why did it suddenly feel like more than that? Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Inside, two strangers under one roof began a silent war neither had planned to fight. A war between distance and desire, duty, and something dangerously close to feeling. The next morning began with the sound of rain easing into sunlight. The estate looked different under daylight, almost gentle, though nothing inside had changed. Lila Tran woke early, her mind restless from a night of silence. She dressed simply, tied her hair into a loose braid, and stepped out into the hall. The mansion was enormous and still. Her footsteps echoed like whispers across marble floors. She found the kitchen and asked the housekeeper if she could make her own coffee. The woman hesitated but nodded. Lila brewed it slowly, savoring the scent. It was the only familiar thing in this new world built of luxury and distance. When she turned, Alexander Carter was standing by the doorway, sleeves rolled up, tie absent, the sunlight cutting across his face. He looked surprised to see her there. "You make your own coffee?" he asked. "I do," she said softly. "It tastes different when you earn it." He watched her pour 2 cups. Without speaking, she handed him one. For a brief moment, the air felt almost normal, almost human. Then his phone buzzed. The spell broke. "Board meeting," he said, his voice returning to its usual clipped tone. "You will need to come with me." "Me?" "You are my wife," he replied. "At least for the cameras." "Yeah." 2 hours later, Lila stood beside him in the sleek conference hall of Carter & Co. Reporters lined the edges, flashes bursting like lightning. She wore a cream dress provided by the company stylist, modest yet elegant. Alexander's hand rested lightly at her back, guiding her forward. The press asked questions about their sudden marriage, and he answered everyone with calm precision. She smiled when she was supposed to, nodded when he paused. Then a voice rose from the crowd. "Mr. Carter, some say your marriage is a business move to secure your late father's inheritance. Care to comment?" Alexander opened his mouth, but Lila spoke first. "Sometimes people forget that even business decisions involve trust, and trust is not something you can buy," the reporters murmured. Cameras clicked faster. Alexander turned slightly, surprise flickering across his face. When they left the building, he said quietly, "You did not have to speak." Quote, "I know," she replied, looking straight ahead. "But silence is not always respect. Sometimes it is surrender." That night, back at the mansion, the atmosphere felt different. The staff smiled at her now, a quiet acknowledgement of the way she had handled herself. In the dining room, she found the courage to ask, "Why do you always sit so far away?" Alexander looked up from his plate. "Habit. Maybe habits can change," she said. He studied her, the corner of his mouth softening just slightly. "Perhaps." After dinner, Lila wandered into the garden. The roses had begun to bloom despite the cold. She crouched near one bush and brushed a petal with her fingers. Behind her, Alexander approached, hands in his pockets. "You should not be out here at night," he said. "I am fine. I used to work until sunrise at my studio," she replied, still focused on the flowers. They remind me that something beautiful can grow out of exhaustion. He tilted his head, watching her. You really believe in that kind of beauty? She smiled faintly. It is the only kind I know. A soft wind stirred the branches, and for a fleeting second, their eyes met two strangers, slowly rewriting the rules of a contract neither truly understood. Later, in his study, Alexander replayed her words while scanning the night skyline. He realized she had spoken more honesty in one sentence than most business partners did in years. He set down his glass and exhaled, a quiet thought slipping through the armor he always wore. What if she is the truth I have been avoiding? Upstairs, Lila opened her sketchbook, something she had not touched since the day her studio closed. She began drawing the garden, each rose, each shadow. The pages filled with the quiet of her new life, one she had promised herself would remain temporary, though her heart had started to forget that promise. Outside, the lights of the mansion glowed softly against the dark. Inside, two people who swore to keep distance were already crossing it, one small step at a time. Days passed, and the rhythm of the mansion slowly began to change. The distance between Alexander Carter and Lila Tran was still there, but it no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a line drawn in chalk, one that might be erased by accident at any moment. One morning, Lila found a letter on her vanity. It was an invitation to the upcoming Carter & Co. annual gala, the company's grandest event of the year. At the bottom, Alexander's handwriting was neat and sharp. You will attend as my wife. When she went downstairs, he was already in the study, reading through reports. You could have told me in person, she said, holding the card. He did not look up. I am telling you now. Lila crossed her arms. You know I am not made for that world. Alexander finally raised his eyes, his tone calm but firm. You are my wife, Lila. They will see you as such. You will not hide. His words carried an edge that was not unkind, but absolute. She nodded slowly. Then I will not hide. But do not expect me to pretend. A faint smirk touched his lips. That is one thing I never have to ask from you. Quote. The following week was a blur of fittings, lessons, and etiquette rehearsals. The stylist adjusted her gowns, photographers trailed through the house, and the staff whispered in admiration of her quiet grace. Each evening, Alexander returned late. Yet he always found her working in the library, surrounded by sketches and fabric swatches. On the night of the gala, the mansion glowed like glass under chandeliers. Alexander waited at the bottom of the staircase, dressed in black tie. When Lila appeared, wearing a simple ivory gown she had sewn herself, he froze for the first time in years. You made that, he said softly. Yes, she replied. I do not wear things I do not understand. He offered his arm. She hesitated, then took it. The cameras flashed as they entered the ballroom together. Conversations paused. The billionaire everyone thought untouchable now walked beside a woman who looked like she belonged there all along. Throughout the evening they played their roles perfectly. He spoke with investors and she smiled for photographs. Yet every now and then she caught him looking at her in the reflection of a champagne glass or a mirrored wall, curious, almost unsure. Then, as the string quartet began to play, a journalist stepped forward and asked loudly, Mr. Carter, many believe this marriage is part of your corporate inheritance deal. Would you call what you have love? The crowd fell silent. Alexander's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, Lila stepped closer and said calmly, Sometimes, love does not start with fireworks. Sometimes it begins as an agreement and grows into something neither side expected. The point is not where it begins, but what we choose to make of it. Her words floated through the hall like music. For a moment, even the reporters lowered their cameras. Alexander looked at her, his eyes softening for the first time. Later, when the music slowed and the crowd scattered, he found her alone on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. You handled that well, he said quietly. I handled it honestly, she replied. Honesty is safer than silence. He studied her face in the moonlight. You surprise me, Mrs. Carter. Then maybe you have not been paying attention, she said, turning toward him with a small smile. He laughed quietly, the sound rare and unguarded. For the first time since their signatures met on paper, something invisible shifted between them, less like obligation, more like possibility. Below the balcony, the city hummed. Inside, the last guests toasted to wealth and power, unaware that the most dangerous change in that house was not in the company's fortune but in the hearts of the two people who had once sworn to feel nothing at all. The week after the gala felt quieter, almost unreal. The press headlines called Lila Tran the mystery wife, who softened New York's coldest billionaire. Alexander ignored the noise, but every time he passed a magazine cover with her face on it, something in him paused. At breakfast, the two of them sat across the long table again, though it did not feel as distant as before. Lila poured coffee for both of them. "You have not said much since the gala," she said, breaking the silence. Alexander looked up from his phone. "You handled yourself well." The board was impressed. "I was not trying to impress them," she replied. "I was trying to protect you." He blinked, surprised. "Protect me? You have people who would rather see you fail. I can feel it in the way they talk to you. And somehow, being married to someone they do not understand makes them nervous." Alexander leaned back, studying her. "You see more than I expected." "I listen more than people think," she said, smiling faintly. Later that day, Alexander invited her to accompany him to a meeting at the Carter Foundation, the charity branch of his company. It was not part of their contract, but she agreed. As they toured the building, Lila noticed how every project was clean, efficient, but missing something heart. She paused in front of a display showing a new community program. "It looks perfect," she said, "but perfection can be cold. These projects need stories, people, names. Otherwise, they are just statistics." "Good dough." Alexander looked at her, half intrigued, half challenged. "And you would change that how?" "I would start by visiting the shelters and schools you fund," she said. "Listen before you build." That night, back at the mansion, she spread sketches across the dining table. They were not of dresses, but of redesigned community spaces, colorful, human, alive. When he walked in, she looked up. "You said function lasts longer than beauty. I think they can last together." Quote. He picked up one sketch, turning it in his hands. "You did all this today?" "Yes," she said. "Old habits. I create when I care." Something softened in his expression. "Then maybe we should create something together." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain outside had turned into snow, the first of the season. Lila felt warmth in his words, something that reached beyond the contract. The next morning, Alexander took her to one of the company's old textile factories that had been closed for years. The building was empty, dust hanging in the sunlight. "This is where my father started," he said quietly. "I have been meaning to turn it into something new." Lila stepped closer to the center of the room. "Let us make it a community workshop, teach local artists, give people a space to rebuild. You have money. I have hands." He smiled slightly. "You always make it sound so simple." "Sometimes it is," she said. "You just have to care enough." As the days passed, they began working together on the project. Staff members noticed how they laughed during meetings, how his tone changed when she spoke. The distance that once defined their marriage began to fade. One evening, after reviewing plans late into the night, Alexander offered to drive her home. When they arrived at the mansion, he stopped by the front steps and said quietly, "I cannot remember the last time this place felt alive." Lila looked at him, her voice gentle. "Maybe it is not the house that changed." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, almost without thinking, he reached for her hand. It was not a gesture of control or contract. It was quiet, uncertain, real. She did not pull away. That night, as she lay in bed, Lila realized she had stopped counting the days left in their agreement. Somewhere between duty and trust, she had forgotten which came first. And downstairs, in his study, Alexander stared at the signed contract on his desk and wondered, for the first time, whether he still wanted it to end. Winter deepened over the city, wrapping the Carter estate in quiet snow. Inside, warmth glowed from the fireplaces, and the steady hum of work filled the days. The old textile factory was slowly transforming into a community workshop, just as Lila Tran had imagined. For the first time in years, Alexander Carter found himself staying late not for profit but for purpose. Every evening they met at the site to check progress. Lila wore thick gloves and a wool scarf, her hair tucked neatly beneath a hat. Alexander often arrived straight from meetings, still in a suit, sleeves rolled to his elbows as he helped carry boxes and tools. The workers whispered that the billionaire and his wife looked like a team. One afternoon, Lila climbed a small ladder to paint a section of the wall. Alexander steadied it from below. "You do not have to do that yourself," he called up. "I know," she said, brushing a stroke of blue paint along the top beam. "But I like to see things change with my own hands." He smiled faintly. "You have changed more than the walls, Lila." She paused and looked down at him. "And you, Alexander, have started to care." For a moment, their eyes met. The air between them felt different, unspoken but undeniable. That night, back at the mansion, the staff had prepared dinner in the smaller dining room at Lila's request. It was the first time they had eaten there together. The smaller space made conversation easier, and laughter came naturally. When she reached to refill his glass, her bracelet caught on the edge of his cufflink. The sound was soft, but their hands froze together. "Sorry," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "Do not be." The tension lingered, tender and dangerous. He wanted to say something, but instead he stood and walked toward the piano in the corner. "My mother used to play," he said. "I have not touched it since she passed." Lila moved closer. "Play something for her, then." Alexander hesitated, then pressed one key, then another, until a quiet melody filled the room. Lila closed her eyes and listened. The music was simple, but full of things he could never say aloud. When he stopped, she whispered, "She would be proud." He looked at her, the question forming before he could stop it. "And you? What would make you proud, Lila?" She thought for a long moment. "If I can leave something kind behind, something that outlives the noise." The fireplace crackled. The room felt smaller, safer. He wanted to reach for her again, but he did not. The contract still stood between them, like an invisible line. Days later, Alexander invited her to the company board, meeting the one where the future of their foundation project would be decided. She stood beside him as the board debated costs, risks, and reputation. When one director dismissed her plan as emotional charity, Alexander's voice cut through the room. "Compassion is not emotion," he said firmly. "It is intelligence. It is the future of this company." The room went silent. Lila looked at him, her heart suddenly full. After the meeting, as they stepped outside into the falling snow, he said quietly, "You make me see things differently." "And you remind me that power can be gentle," she replied. They stood for a long moment on the icy steps, their breath visible in the cold air. Somewhere between them, the distance that once defined their marriage had melted. What remained was something fragile, something beginning. Inside the car, neither spoke. But as the city lights flickered across their faces, both knew that the line between what was real and what was once a contract had already blurred beyond repair. The first day of spring arrived with sunlight breaking through the last of the winter clouds. The community workshop was nearly complete, and the news had begun to spread. For weeks, the city had whispered about the Carter Foundation's transformation from a corporate charity into a living, breathing place of hope. Cameras waited for the grand opening. Everyone wanted to see the new power couple behind it all. But inside the Carter mansion, something darker was brewing. That morning, Alexander Carter received an email marked confidential. It contained photos Lila talking to a journalist, smiling in a cafe, handing over a folder. The message read, "Your wife has been selling the story of your marriage. Protect the company before she destroys it." He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. The sender's name was Victor Hale, one of his oldest board members, and the man who had always resented Lila's presence. Still, the images cut deep. He had trusted her. Against every rule he had written for himself, he had begun to believe in her honesty. When Lila entered his office later that morning, she sensed it instantly. The air was colder. He stood by the window, phone in hand, his expression unreadable. "You met with a reporter," he said flatly. Her eyes widened. "Yes, about the workshop. They wanted to cover the opening." "You handed them documents," he said. "Company files." "They were press releases approved by your assistant," she replied, confused. "Alexander, what is this about?" He turned, eyes sharp. "It is about trust. Something you keep talking about, but maybe never understood." Lila froze, pain flickering across her face. "You think I betrayed you?" "I think I was a fool to forget this started as a contract," he said, voice low but cutting. "And fools pay for their mistakes." Her hands trembled. "After everything we built, after everything we shared, you believe a rumor?" "I believe evidence," he said, holding up the phone. Lila stepped back as if the distance could protect her from the words. "Then there is nothing left to say." She left the office without looking back. The sound of her heels on the marble floor echoed through the mansion, sharp and final. That evening, the press exploded with headlines. Carter marriage in crisis. Charity scandal unfolds. Photographers swarmed the gates. Alexander stayed inside, staring at the framed sketch she had made of the workshop, the one with their initials hidden in the corner. He wanted to believe it meant something, but doubt had already taken root. Meanwhile, Lila packed a small suitcase in silence. She left her wedding ring on the nightstand, beside a folded note that read, "You asked me once what makes me proud. Telling the truth still does." When Alexander returned to the bedroom hours later, the room was empty. He stood in the doorway, the quiet pressing against his chest like guilt. For the first time, he realized what he had destroyed. Not a deal, not a partnership, but the only thing that had ever felt real. The next morning, the opening ceremony went on without her. Cameras flashed, reporters cheered, but Alexander's speech was hollow. Every word he spoke about trust and redemption echoed through a heart that no longer believed them. As the applause faded, he looked down from the podium and saw the empty chair that had been reserved for Lila, the same chair where she was supposed to sit beside him, smiling with quiet pride. He paused, swallowed hard, and said softly into the microphone, "Some stories begin with contracts, others end with them. But the best ones teach us who we could have been if only we had believed." The audience did not understand, but somewhere out there, perhaps listening from a distance, Lila did. 2 weeks passed, and the mansion felt emptier than ever. The reporters had moved on to other stories, but Alexander Carter still carried the weight of the silence Lila left behind. Every room reminded him of her, the half-finished sketch on the library desk, the faint scent of her perfume that clung to the hallway. He buried himself in work, meeting after meeting, refusing to speak of what had happened. Yet late at night, he would catch himself staring at the chair across from his desk, the one she used to occupy while sharing ideas for the workshop. Her words still echoed in his mind. Perfection can be cold. Quote. One morning, his assistant rushed into his office, holding a tablet. "Sir, you need to see this." The screen showed a live stream from the community workshop's grand reopening. Lila stood on stage beside the mayor and a group of volunteers. The program had survived the scandal and was now officially named the Lila Project. The crowd cheered as she spoke. Her voice was calm, steady. This place was built from mistakes and second chances. It belongs to everyone who believes that compassion can be stronger than power. Even when people lose faith, kindness does not disappear. It just waits to be seen again. Alexander stared at the screen, his throat tightening. She had rebuilt what he had nearly destroyed. The boardroom logic he had lived by his whole life suddenly felt small compared to her quiet strength. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and left the office. By the time he reached the workshop, the event was ending. Volunteers were packing up, laughter echoing in the open hall. Lila stood by the doorway, speaking with an elderly woman who thanked her for saving the program. When she turned and saw him, her smile faded, replaced by guarded surprise. "Why are you here, Alexander?" she asked softly. He stepped closer, his voice low but sincere. "To apologize. To admit I was wrong. I believed lies because they were easier than facing what I felt." She looked at him for a long moment. "You cannot undo the hurt with a single visit." "I know," he said. "But I can start by standing beside you again, if you will let me." Her eyes softened slightly, but she shook her head. "This project is not about us anymore. It is bigger than both of us." He nodded slowly. "Then let me help it grow. No contracts, no deals, just faith." Silence hung between them. Then, without a word, Lila handed him a paintbrush from the table. "If you really mean that, start with the wall over there. It still needs color." Alexander took the brush. Together, they painted in silence as the afternoon light streamed through the high windows. With each stroke, the tension eased, replaced by something fragile but real. When they finished, Lila stepped back to look at the wall. A soft smile appeared on her face. "You always said beauty fades," she said quietly. He glanced at her, eyes warm. "Maybe I was wrong about that too." For the first time in weeks, she did not look away. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Carter understood that forgiveness was not a transaction, it was a choice. Spring gave way to summer, and the old factory was now alive every day with music, color, and laughter. The Lila Project had grown into a symbol of second chances, drawing visitors from all over the city. Children painted, veterans learned new trades, and local artists found purpose again. Through it all, Alexander Carter kept his promise: no contracts, no headlines, no conditions. He worked quietly beside Lila, rebuilding what pride had once broken. One evening, as the sun dipped low through the glass roof, the workshop lights flickered on, casting a warm glow across the walls they had painted together. Lila walked through the hall, now filled with finished art pieces and fabric designs hanging in neat rows. At the center stood a covered frame, taller than the others. Alexander waited beside it, his hands steady but his voice soft. "There is one last thing this place needs," he said. "A name that tells its story." Lila tilted her head. "It already has one." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe this is just a reminder." He pulled the cloth away. Behind it was a painting, her original sketch of the community workshop, recreated in vivid color. At the bottom, in delicate handwriting, were the words, "The Art of Lila Tran." Her breath caught. "You remembered that?" I remember everything, he said quietly, especially the things I nearly lost. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she blinked them away. You did not have to do this. I did, he replied, because love without truth is just another deal. You taught me that. For a long moment they stood there in silence, surrounded by the hum of distant laughter and the faint smell of fresh paint. Then Alexander reached into his pocket and held out a small velvet box. Inside was the same platinum ring she had left behind on their nightstand months ago, but this time it shone brighter, restored, and whole. He took a slow breath. Lila, I do not want a contract anymore. I want a life. With you. No terms. No expiration date. Her hand trembled as she touched the ring. Are you sure? He smiled. For the first time, yes. She laughed softly, tears finally falling. Then this time I will say yes, for the right reason. Quote. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the room erupted in applause from the volunteers who had quietly gathered to watch. The music swelled, filling the air with warmth and relief. As they embraced, sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the mural behind them, two hands meeting in the center, painted across the wall they had built together. Lila whispered, Maybe perfection can have a heart after all. Alexander smiled against her hair. No, it always did. I just needed you to show me where it was. And under the golden light of their second wedding, surrounded by the life they created from ruin, every prejudice that once stood between them was finally broken for good.